The wagon crested the ridge just as the autumn sun broke through the clouds, and Nathan Harlow felt his heart hammering against his ribs in a way it had not done since the war ended 3 years ago. He stood at the coaching stop with his hat in his hands, turning the brim over and over between his fingers, watching the team of horses labor up the final stretch of muddy road. 6 months of letters had led to this moment. 6 months of careful words exchanged with a woman named Sarah, arranged through the Frontier Matrimonial Agency out of Millbrook. She had written about her love of growing things, her quiet nature, her hope for a peaceful life. He had written back about his homestead, the valley he was carving into farmland, the loneliness that settled over a man when the only voices he heard were his own and the wind through the pines. The agency had promised compatibility. They had promised careful matching based on temperament and values. What they had not promised, what they had never once mentioned in any of their official correspondence, was that Sarah would be an orc. The wagon rolled to a stop. The driver, a grizzled man named Polk who ran the route twice weekly, climbed down and started unhitching the luggage strapped to the back. Nathan stood frozen, his mouth dry as the passenger door opened. She stepped down carefully, one hand lifting her skirts, the other gripping the door frame for balance. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet or just over, with the kind of athletic grace that spoke of strength without bulk. Her dress was simple blue cotton, travel-worn but clean, and it draped over a figure that was unmistakably feminine despite the breadth of her shoulders. Her skin was green, the color of spring leaves just past their first unfurling, and her dark hair was pinned back in a practical bun that revealed the pointed tips of her ears. Small tusks curved up from her lower jaw, barely an inch long, giving her full lips a shape that was different but not unpleasant. She turned and saw him, and her whole face lit up with a smile that was equal parts hope and terror. Nathan realized he was staring. He also realized that his silence was stretching too long, that her smile was already beginning to falter at the edges, that brave light in her dark eyes starting to dim. "Sarah," he managed, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "Nathan Harlow." She had a clear voice, direct and warm. She took a step toward him, then stopped, her hands clasped together in front of her. "I am Sarah Everwood. The agency said you would be meeting me." Polk dragged a trunk and 2 carpet bags to the ground with a thud. "This all your kit, miss?" "Yes, thank you." She did not look at the driver. Her eyes were fixed on Nathan, searching his face with an intensity that made him feel like she was reading his entire soul in the space of a heartbeat. He should say something. He should welcome her, or question her, or demand to know what kind of game the agency was playing. Instead, what came out was, "Your letters never mentioned that I am an orc." She said it flatly, and the brightness went out of her entirely. Her shoulders squared, though, and her chin lifted. "No, they did not. The agency assured me it would not matter, that you had been selected for compatibility of character, not appearance." "They did not mention it to me either," Nathan said, and watched surprise flicker across her features. "You did not know?" "Not until this moment." She absorbed that, her expression shifting through several emotions too quickly for him to track. Behind her, Polk cleared his throat. "Fare's been paid through the agency, Harlow. You taking responsibility for the lady's belongings?" The question forced Nathan into motion. He stepped forward and lifted the trunk onto his shoulder, the weight solid and real. "I will handle it. Thank you, Polk." The driver tipped his hat, gave Sarah a curious look that contained less hostility than Nathan might have expected from the average frontier settler, and climbed back onto his bench. Within moments, the wagon was rolling away down the road toward the next stop, leaving them alone in the clearing beside the rough-hewn coach shelter. Sarah stood very still, her carpetbags at her feet. "You are deciding whether to send me back." It was not a question. Nathan set the trunk down and turned to face her properly. She was bracing herself, he realized, waiting for rejection. There was a set to her jaw that spoke of having endured this before, perhaps many times. "The next coach is not until Thursday," he said. Something flickered in her eyes. Not hope, but a grim acknowledgement. "So I have 3 days to convince you I am worth keeping." The words landed wrong, too transactional, too desperate. Nathan felt a sharp pang of guilt that he could not entirely explain. "I did not say that. You did not have to." She bent and picked up her bags. "I understand the situation, Mr. Harlow. The agency took my money, assured me this was a legitimate match, and clearly misrepresented at least one of us to the other. You are under no obligation. If you can direct me to the nearest inn, I will arrange my own return journey." There was no inn within 20 miles. They both knew it. This was frontier country, raw and new, with homesteads scattered across the valleys like seeds thrown by a careless hand. The nearest town worthy of the name was Millbrook, a hard day's ride to the east. Nathan looked at her, really looked. She held herself with dignity despite the obvious fear underneath. Her letters had been gentle and thoughtful, full of small observations about the world that had made him smile during long winter evenings. She had written about the way frost formed patterns on windows, about the satisfaction of bread rising properly, about missing the smell of pine forests. He had written back about the valley, about the deer that came down to drink from the creek at dawn, about the way the mountains turned purple at sunset. None of those letters had been lies, he realized. The person who wrote them was standing in front of him, waiting to be rejected. "My homestead is 2 hours north," he said. "There is a spare room. You are welcome to it while we determine what should be done." Her eyes widened. "You would take me to your home. I would not leave you here." The words came out sharper than he intended, rough with an emotion he could not name. He softened his tone. "The letters we exchanged were real, I think. That should count for something." "They were real," she said quickly, fiercely. "Everything I wrote was true. I did not lie about who I am, only what I am. The agency lied to us both, it seems." Nathan picked up the trunk again. "My wagon is just beyond those trees. We should leave before the light fails." She followed him silently, her bags clutched in her hands. His wagon was a sturdy flatbed he had built himself, pulled by 2 patient draft horses that had served him well through 3 seasons. He loaded her trunk into the back and helped her up onto the bench seat, acutely aware of the warmth of her hand in his, the careful way she settled her skirts. They rode in silence for the first hour, the wagon creaking along the rutted track that passed for a road in this part of the territory. The mountains rose around them, heavy with pine and aspen, the latter already turning gold with the advancing autumn. Nathan kept his eyes on the road and his hands busy with the reins, but he was painfully conscious of the woman beside him. Finally, she spoke. "Your letters mentioned you fought in the border wars." 3 years in the territorial militia, he confirmed. "Mustered out when the treaty was signed." "Did you fight orcs?" The question was direct, unflinching. He respected that. "Yes. And now you are taking one into your home." "Now I am taking my mail-order bride to the home we were meant to share," he said, surprising himself with the firmness of the statement. "The agency matched us. They took money from us both. Until I understand what their game is, I would prefer to assume they did their job, at least in part." She was quiet for a long moment. "That is more grace than I expected." "What did you expect? Honestly?" "I expected you to put me back on that wagon the moment you saw me." Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "I have seen how humans look at my people. Even here, in frontier country where we are supposed to be beyond old hatreds. Nathan thought about the war, about the things he had seen and done, about the treaty that had ended it, the one that promised peaceful coexistence and new beginnings. He thought about the gap between promises and reality. "I fought because I was ordered to," he said finally. "When the treaty was signed, I came out here to leave all of that behind. To build something instead of destroying." He glanced at her. "Your letters spoke of the same thing: peace, growth, a quiet life." "They did." Her voice softened. "I meant every word." The wagon crested another rise and the valley spread out below them. Nathan felt the familiar surge of pride and satisfaction he always experienced at this view. The creek cut through the center, bright with reflected sky. His cabin stood on the eastern slope, small but solid, with a barn beside it and fields stretching out in neat rows, already harvested and put to bed for the winter. "This is yours?" Sarah asked, and he heard something like wonder in her voice. "Every acre." "Claimed it 4 years ago, built the cabin 3 years back, broke the ground for planting 2 springs ago." He guided the horses down the slope. "It is not much yet, but it is mine." "It is beautiful," she said quietly. "Your letters did not do it justice." They reached the cabin as the sun touched the western peaks. Nathan helped Sarah down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside while she followed with her bags, looking around with open curiosity. He had built the cabin to last, with thick log walls and a stone fireplace that could heat the whole space. The main room held a table, 2 chairs, a rocking chair he had made over the previous winter, and a cookstove he had hauled in at considerable expense. 2 doors led off the main room, one to his bedroom, one to the spare room he had prepared with optimistic hope over the past month. "The spare room is through there," he said, nodding to the left-hand door. "It has a bed, a chest, a washstand. The linens are clean." Sarah set her bags down and moved to the doorway, looking in. She stood there for a long moment, her back to him, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. "Thank you," she said without turning. "This is more than kind." "It is what was promised," Nathan said. "By the agency, by our agreement. I may not have expected you, Sarah, ever would, but I gave my word to welcome my bride. I intend to keep it, at least until we understand what we are dealing with." She turned then, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I fell in love with your letters," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "With the man who wrote about watching deer at dawn and the way the mountains turn purple. With someone who valued peace and growth and quiet. I know you did not expect me, and I know this is not what you wanted, but she stopped, pressing her lips together. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." Nathan stood very still, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. "You fell in love with words on paper." "I fell in love with the person behind them," she corrected. "With the kindness and the loneliness and the hope. I have been alone for a long time, Mr. Harlow. When the agency said they had found a match, that someone had chosen me based on who I am rather than what I am." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I suppose I allowed myself to hope too much." He should say something. He should address what she had just confessed, should acknowledge the vulnerability she had just shown. Instead, he found himself saying, "I need to tend the horses and close up the barn for the night. There is a well outside the door and the pump works well. Make yourself at home. I will be back within the hour and we can make supper." He fled, essentially, out into the cooling evening air, leaving her standing in the cabin with her confession hanging between them. The horses needed tending, yes, but he also needed space to think. An orc woman. His mail-order bride was an orc woman, tall and green-skinned and tusked, and she had just told him she had fallen in love with his letters. Nathan worked through his chores mechanically, unhitching the horses, rubbing them down, measuring out their feed. His mind spun in circles. He had not been lying when he said he had fought orcs during the war. He had seen them as enemies, as the other side of a conflict he barely understood. But that had been soldiers, warriors, people trying to kill him just as he had tried to kill them. Sarah was none of those things. Sarah wrote about frost patterns and bread rising. Sarah had looked at his valley with wonder in her eyes. By the time he returned to the cabin, full dark had fallen and lamplight glowed warm through the windows. He paused on the threshold, looking through the glass. Sarah moved around the kitchen area with easy competence, her travel dress covered with an apron she must have brought with her. She had found his stores, apparently, and was doing something at the stove. He opened the door. The smell of cooking onions and herbs hit him immediately, rich and savory. "I hope you do not mind," Sarah said, not turning from the stove. "I found vegetables in your cold cellar and dried meat in the pantry. I thought I should make myself useful." "I do not mind." Nathan hung his coat and hat on the pegs by the door. "You do not have to earn your keep, though." "I have to earn something," she said quietly. "You have given me shelter when you had every right to refuse. The least I can do is cook a meal." He wanted to argue, but the weariness in her voice stopped him. Instead, he moved to the table and sat down, watching her work. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent a great deal of time in kitchens, chopping and stirring and tasting with practiced efficiency. "Where did you come from?" he asked. "Before the agency, I mean. Your letters never said." "A settlement north of here in the foothills." She added something to the pot and stirred. "My father was a tracker, worked for one of the big lumber operations. My mother took in sewing. They are both gone now, 5 years past. I am sorry. Thank you." She ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table, along with a plate of biscuits she must have made while he was in the barn. "After they passed, I found work where I could. Cooking, mostly. Cleaning. But the settlements up there are small, and once the novelty of having an orc servant wore off, so did the tolerance. I thought perhaps farther south, in frontier country where people are more concerned with survival than bloodlines." She trailed off, taking a seat across from him. The agency seemed like an answer to prayer, a chance to start fresh, to find someone who might value me for myself. Nathan tasted the stew. It was excellent, rich and flavorful, better than anything he had managed on his own in 3 years of homesteading. "This is very good." A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you." They ate in silence for a while, the quiet broken only by the crackle of the fire and the clink of spoons against bowls. It was not an uncomfortable silence, Nathan realized. It was the kind of quiet he had imagined sharing with a partner, companionable and easy. "I should tell you," he said finally, setting down his spoon. "I do not know what to do about this situation. The agency clearly misrepresented things to both of us. I do not know if our agreement is even valid, legally speaking. I understand. But I also know that I do not want to send you back on the next coach." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. "Your letters were genuine. You are genuine, I think. I think I would like to know the person who wrote those letters if you are willing to give me that chance." Her hand stilled on her bowl. "You want me to stay?" "I want us to take some time to determine what we actually want," Nathan said carefully. "We are strangers who have only known each other through letters. Perhaps we should take the opportunity to know each other in person before making any permanent decisions." "A trial period," Sarah said slowly. "Living as—" "What? Strangers sharing a house, as partners, perhaps," Nathan suggested. "Working the homestead together, learning each other's ways. We can give it until spring. If by then we feel the match is not right, I will ensure you have safe passage to wherever you wish to go, with funds sufficient to start over." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "And if the match is right, then we honor the agreement we made through the agency," Nathan said. "We marry for real and build a life here together." Sarah was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his face. Finally, she nodded. "Until spring, then, as partners." "As partners," Nathan agreed, and felt something settle in his chest, something that might have been rightness. The autumn weeks slipped by with surprising ease. Nathan had worried that sharing his space would feel like an invasion, a disruption of the routines he had built over 3 years of solitary living. Instead, Sarah fit into the rhythms of the homestead like she had always been there. She rose with the dawn, just as he did, and moved through the morning chores with quiet efficiency. She knew her way around animals, he discovered, handling his chickens and the milk cow with a gentle competence that spoke of experience. She baked bread that put his own efforts to shame, turning out golden loaves that filled the cabin with warmth and the kind of smell that made a place feel like home. They fell into an easy division of labor. Nathan tended the larger tasks, repairing the barn roof before the winter snows came, splitting and stacking firewood, hunting to supplement their stores. Sarah managed the household, the cooking and preserving, the mending and cleaning, but she also surprised him by working beside him in the fields when the work was heavy. She was strong. Not in a brutish way, but with the kind of lean strength that came from years of hard work. When they dug out the cold cellar to expand it, she wielded a shovel as tirelessly as he did, her breath misting in the cooling air, her face set with determination. "You do not have to help with this," he told her one afternoon, watching her haul out another bucket of earth. "This is heavy work." "So," she dumped the bucket and turned back to him, one eyebrow raised. "I am capable of heavy work, Nathan. I have been doing it all my life." He had learned to read her expressions over the weeks. The slight lift of that eyebrow meant she was amused, gently mocking. "I only meant that I do not expect you to labor like a field hand." "And I do not expect to sit idle while there is work to be done," she countered, climbing back down into the pit. "We are partners until spring, remember? Partners share the burdens." That word, partners. She used it often, reminding him of the agreement they had made, but also claiming space for herself in his life. He found he did not mind. They talked while they worked, trading stories and observations. Sarah told him about growing up in the northern settlements, about learning to read from a missionary's wife who had looked past green skin to see a curious child. Nathan told her about his own childhood on a farm back east, about the younger brother who had died of fever when Nathan was 12, about the way grief had driven him to enlist when the war broke out. "You were running from pain," Sarah said one evening as they sat by the fire, mending harnesses. Her hands moved deftly, threading leather with practiced ease. "I suppose I was," Nathan admitted. "It seemed easier to fight someone else's battles than to face my own losses. And now you are here, still alone, still running." He looked at her sharply, but her expression was gentle, without judgment. "I came here to build something," he said. "That is not running." "No," she agreed. "But you chose a place where you would not have to share what you build. That is a kind of running, I think." The observation stung because it was true. Nathan set down the harness he was working on. "Is that why you answered the agency's advertisement, to stop running?" "Yes." Sarah did not look up from her work. "I was tired of being tolerated. Tired of moving from place to place, always temporary, always disposable. I thought if I could find one person who chose me, who wanted me to stay." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Foolish, perhaps." "Not foolish," Nathan said quietly. "Human." She did look up at that, her dark eyes meeting his. "I am not human." "No," he agreed. But you are a person, Sarah. You have the same wants and fears as anyone. That is what I meant. Something shifted in her expression, something warm and vulnerable. She opened her mouth to speak, but a sudden pounding on the door made them both start. Nathan rose quickly, his hand instinctively going to the rifle mounted above the fireplace. Visitors were rare this far out, especially after dark. "Who is there?" Millbrook Sheriff's man, a voice called back. "Open up, Harlow." Nathan exchanged a glance with Sarah, whose face had gone wary and tight. He opened the door to find a man in a heavy coat standing on his porch, a deputy's star pinned to his chest. Behind him, another wagon stood in the yard, and Nathan could make out a figure sitting in the back, wrapped in blankets. "Can I help you, deputy?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice neutral. "That depends." The deputy looked past him, his eyes finding Sarah where she sat by the fire. His expression hardened. "You Nathan Harlow, the one who sent for a mail-order bride through the Frontier Matrimonial Agency?" "I am." "Then we have a problem." The deputy stepped aside, gesturing to the wagon. "Got a woman here claims she is your bride. Says she was sent by the agency, has paperwork to prove it." Nathan felt ice settle in his stomach. "What?" A woman climbed down from the wagon, moving stiffly as if she had been traveling hard. She was small and blonde, wrapped in a fine cloak that spoke of money. When she reached the porch, she looked up at Nathan with an expression of relief and irritation. "Mr. Harlow, finally," she said. "I have been traveling for 3 weeks to reach you. The agency told me you would be meeting me at the coach stop, but when I arrived today, no one was there. I had to hire this man to bring me out here, and I must say," she stopped, her eyes going past him to Sarah. Her expression turned to shock, then anger. "Who is that?" "That," Nathan said slowly, his mind racing, "is Sarah Everwood, my mail-order bride." "You're," the blonde woman sputtered. "That is impossible. I am your mail-order bride. I have the contract right here." She fumbled in her bag and pulled out a folded paper, thrusting it at Nathan. "I paid the agency $300 for this match. $300. Nathan took the paper, unfolding it with numb fingers. It was indeed a contract, signed and sealed by the Frontier Matrimonial Agency, promising to match one Miss Caroline Fletcher with one Mr. Nathan Harlow of the Copper Valley Territory. Compatibility guaranteed. The date on the contract was 3 weeks after the date on his agreement with Sarah. "This is a mistake," Nathan said, but even as he spoke, a cold realization was settling over him. "You were both matched with me, apparently." The deputy did not sound sympathetic. "Miss Fletcher came to the sheriff when you failed to meet her coach. Had all her paperwork in order, seemed legitimate. Then someone mentioned seeing you pick up an orc woman a few weeks back, and well," he gestured at the cabin. "Here we are." Caroline Fletcher drew herself up. "I demand an explanation, Mr. Harlow. Are you trying to defraud me?" "No one is defrauding anyone," Nathan said sharply. "I paid the agency for a mail-order bride. They sent me Sarah. I had no knowledge of you, Miss Fletcher, until this moment." "That is absurd." "The agency is highly reputable. The agency matched me with Nathan 6 weeks ago." Sarah's voice cut in, clear and firm. She had risen from her chair and moved to stand beside Nathan, the contract he had signed with the agency in her hand. "I have the paperwork as well. It seems we have both been cheated." Caroline Fletcher stared at the document Sarah held out, her face going pale. "This cannot be. I paid them $300. "I paid them $200, Sarah said quietly. "And I paid them $150, Nathan added, feeling sick. $550 between the three of us, for matches that cannot all be valid." The deputy swore under his breath. "Sounds like the agency is running a swindle. Not the first time I have heard rumors, but this is the first solid evidence." What does this mean for my contract? Caroline demanded. I have rights. I was promised a husband, a homestead, a new life, I think, Nathan said slowly, his mind working through the implications. It means none of our contracts are valid. The agency defrauded us all. That is unacceptable, Caroline's voice rose. I sold everything I owned to come here. I gave up my entire life. So did I, Sarah said, and there was steel underneath the quiet words. I paid the agency every coin I had saved over 5 years. I came here in good faith, just as you did. The two women stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Nathan stepped between them, his mind racing. Deputy, what is the legal standing here? If the agency defrauded us, what happens to the agreements? The deputy scratched his jaw. Not my area of expertise, Harlow. You would need to talk to a lawyer, maybe the land office too, if your claim is tied up in this mess. My claim? Nathan felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. What does my land claim have to do with this? You filed under the Married Settlers Act, did you not? The deputy pulled out a small notebook, flipping through pages. Yeah, here it is. Nathan Harlow, 160 acres in Copper Valley, claimed under the provision that you would be married within 6 months of filing. That deadline is. He checked the dates. End of November. 3 weeks from now. Nathan's hands clenched. He had filed his expanded claim in June, after 2 years of proving up his original 40 acres. The Married Settlers Act allowed for additional land grants to married couples willing to develop frontier territory. The land office had required proof of engagement or pending marriage. He had presented his contract with the Frontier Matrimonial Agency as that proof. If the contract was fraudulent, his claim was invalid. This is a disaster, he said quietly. This is fraud. Caroline's voice was shrill. That agency promised me a husband with a land claim, a man of good character, a fresh start. Instead, I find him living with an orc woman and my entire investment in question. Watch your tongue, Sarah said, her voice dropping into a register that made the hairs on Nathan's neck stand up. I am not the villain here, Miss Fletcher. We have both been used. You, Caroline started, but the deputy held up a hand. Ladies, gentlemen, this is a mess and no mistake, but it is not going to be solved tonight by standing in the cold yelling at each other. He looked at Nathan. You have room for Miss Fletcher tonight. Nathan wanted to say no. He wanted to send Caroline Fletcher back to town, back to wherever she came from, wanted to erase the last hour and return to the quiet evening he had been sharing with Sarah. But he was a practical man, and turning a woman out into the freezing night was not something he could do, no matter how complicated she made his life. The barn has a loft, he said. It is clean and dry. I can make up a pallet. The barn, Caroline looked appalled. You expect me to sleep in a barn? I expect you to accept the hospitality offered, Nathan said flatly. The cabin has 2 bedrooms. I occupy one. Sarah occupies the other, unless you would prefer to pay the deputy to drive you back to Millbrook tonight. She looked at the deputy, who shook his head. My horse is tired, miss, and so am I. I will be bedding down in my own barn for the night, then heading back at first light. You can ride with me if you like, or stay here and sort things out with Mr. Harlow. Caroline bit her lip, clearly warring with herself. Finally, she nodded stiffly. The barn will suffice for tonight, but tomorrow we will be having a serious discussion about how to resolve this situation, Mr. Harlow. Nathan showed her to the barn, carrying blankets and a lantern, while Sarah remained in the cabin with a face like stone. He made up a reasonably comfortable pallet in the loft, checked that the space was weatherproof and safe, and left Caroline to settle in with a curt good night. When he returned to the cabin, Sarah was standing by the fire, her arms wrapped around herself. I should leave, she said without preamble. This is too complicated. Your land claim is at stake. If you marry her, you can save it." "No." The word came out sharp and absolute. Nathan crossed the room to stand in front of her. "That is not happening, Sarah. But your land can go to hell if the price is sending you away and marrying a woman I do not know or care about." Her eyes widened. "Nathan, we had an agreement," he continued, his voice rough with emotion he had not known he was feeling. "Partners until spring. I intend to honor that. We have been cheated, both of us, but that does not change what has grown between us these past weeks." "What has grown?" she whispered. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hands in his. They were warm and strong, calloused from work. "You know what I am talking about, Sarah. I see the way you look at me. I know you feel this too." "I told you the first night," she said, her voice barely audible. "I fell in love with your letters, but now—" She met his eyes, and hers were bright with unshed tears. "Now I am falling in love with you, the real you, and it terrifies me." Nathan's heart did something complicated in his chest. "It terrifies me too." "Then what do we do?" "We fight," he said simply. "That agency defrauded us. They put my land claim in jeopardy. They took your money and lied to you. I am not going to let them win, Sarah. We are going to Millbrook, and we are going to tear that agency apart." She stared at him. "How?" "I do not know yet," Nathan admitted. "But I know I am not marrying Caroline Fletcher to save a land claim, and I know I am not letting you go." Sarah's breath caught. "You barely know me. I know you rise before dawn to make sure the coffee is ready when I wake. I know you sing to the chickens when you collect eggs. I know you read the same passages in your book 3 times when something troubles you. I know you are kind and strong and brave, and I know that I want to spend the rest of my life learning everything else." He squeezed her hands gently. "If you will have me—" "This is madness," she whispered, but she was smiling through tears. "We have known each other barely 2 months. Then let us make it official." Nathan took a breath, his heart hammering. "Marry me, Sarah. Not because of the agency or the land claim or any other reason except that I choose you. I want you as my wife, my partner, my companion. I want to wake up to your coffee and fall asleep to your breathing. I want to build this life with you, however complicated it gets." "Nathan." She shook her head, but she was still smiling. "The land office will not recognize it. The claim requires a registered marriage through proper channels. If the agency is fraudulent, any marriage based on their contract is questionable." "Then we get married for real," Nathan said. "Properly, legally, witnessed and recorded. We go to Millbrook, we marry in front of the county clerk, and then we shut down the agency that tried to cheat us." Sarah laughed, a sound caught between disbelief and joy. "You are serious, deadly serious." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then slowly she nodded. "Yes, yes, yes, Nathan Harlow, I will marry you." She squeezed his hands back. "I will be your wife, your partner, your companion. I will wake you with coffee and argue with you about crop rotation and grow old beside you in this valley." Her smile widened. "And I will help you destroy the agency that brought us together while trying to tear us apart." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and felt something in his chest unlock that he had not known was closed. She held him back just as fiercely, her face pressed against his shoulder. "What about Miss Fletcher?" she murmured against his shirt. "We tell her the truth in the morning," Nathan said. "We offer to help her recover her money from the agency, but make it clear that I am marrying you. If that costs me the land claim, so be it. I will file again under my own name, build back up from the original 40 acres. It will be harder, but we will manage." "We will manage," Sarah repeated, and the word felt like a promise. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other by the fire, while outside the night deepened, and the first snow of the season began to fall in soft, silent flakes. Morning came cold and bright. Nathan woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and for a moment he luxuriated in the simple pleasure of it before remembering the complications sleeping in his barn. He dressed quickly and emerged to find Sarah at the stove, her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression peaceful despite the chaos looming over them. She smiled at him, and he felt his heart do that complicated thing again. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He crossed to her and, emboldened by the previous night's declarations, pressed a kiss to her temple. She leaned into him briefly, a gesture of quiet affection that felt more intimate than any grand passion. "I will fetch Miss Fletcher," he said. "We should tell her together." Sarah nodded, her smile fading into something more serious. "However she reacts, we face it together." Nathan found Caroline in the barn, already awake and looking distinctly unhappy with her accommodations. She had made an attempt to tidy herself, but her dress was creased from travel, and her hair was escaping its pins. "Good morning, Miss Fletcher," he said politely. "There is breakfast at the cabin if you would like to join us." She followed him silently across the yard. Inside, Sarah had set the table for three, with plates of bacon, eggs, and fresh biscuits. It was a generous spread, more than Nathan would have bothered with on his own, and he recognized it as Sarah's way of extending hospitality even to someone who threatened her place here. They sat down in awkward silence. Finally, Caroline set down her fork and looked at Nathan directly. "I have been thinking," she said. "It seems to me that the solution is obvious. You need a wife to maintain your land claim. I need a husband as promised by the agency. Miss Everwood, while I sympathize with her situation, has no legal standing here. Her contract is clearly fraudulent, as evidenced by its earlier date and her nature. The agency obviously made an error in matching you with her." Sarah's hand stilled on her cup. Nathan set down his own fork very carefully. "Miss Fletcher, I appreciate that you have traveled a great distance and invested significant money in this arrangement. However, I must be clear. I am not going to marry you." Caroline blinked. "I beg your pardon." "I am going to marry Sarah," Nathan continued, his voice steady and firm. "We will be traveling to Millbrook to register our marriage with the county clerk and to file a complaint against the Frontier Matrimonial Agency for fraud. You are welcome to join us in the complaint. Between the three of us, we have evidence of a swindle that should be more than sufficient to shut them down and possibly recover our fees." "You cannot be serious." Caroline's voice rose. "You are choosing an orc over a proper marriage, over your land claim." "I am choosing the woman I love," Nathan said quietly. "Sarah's race has nothing to do with it." "Her race has everything to do with it." Caroline stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. "You are a human man, Mr. Harlow. You fought in the border wars. And now you are telling me you intend to marry one of them." "One of them," Sarah said softly, "is sitting right here, Miss Fletcher. Perhaps you could direct your insults at me properly instead of speaking about me as if I am not present." Caroline turned on her. "You have bewitched him somehow. Used some kind of orc trickery. That is enough." Nathan stood as well, his voice hard. "Sarah has done nothing but be herself. If you cannot speak civilly, Miss Fletcher, you are welcome to wait outside while we finish our meal." Caroline's face flushed red. "This is outrageous. I will report this to the authorities. I will contest your claim." You will do what you think is right," Nathan interrupted. "But you will not insult my future wife in her own home. Now you have three choices. You can accept my offer to join us in Millbrook and help us bring down the agency that cheated us all. You can refuse and make your own way back to town. Or you can continue making threats and accusations, in which case I will hitch up my wagon and drive you to town myself immediately." "Which will it be?" The silence stretched out, tense and brittle. Finally, Caroline seemed to deflate. She sank back into her chair, her hands trembling. "I have nothing," she whispered. "I sold my mother's house to pay the agency. I have no family, no prospects. The agency promised me a fresh start, a husband, security. What am I supposed to do now?" Nathan felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. "You can start by helping us make sure the agency does not do this to anyone else. Then, if you wish, Sarah and I will help you find legitimate work in Millbrook or one of the other settlements. You are not without options, Miss Fletcher. You are just not going to marry me." Caroline looked between them, her expression cycling through anger, desperation, and finally resignation. "Very well," she said at last. "I will join your complaint, but I want my $300 back and I want that agency destroyed." "On that," Sarah said quietly, "we are in complete agreement." They left for Millbrook the next morning, Nathan driving the wagon with Sarah beside him and Caroline sitting in the back with the luggage. It was a long, cold day of travel, the road rutted and difficult, but they made good time. By late afternoon, the town came into view, a sprawling collection of buildings clustered around a crossroads that served as the commercial heart of the territory. Nathan drove straight to the land office, a solid brick building near the center of town. Inside, a clerk named Winters looked up from his desk with a polite expression that quickly turned to surprise when he saw Sarah. "Mr. Harlow," Winters said slowly, "what can I do for you?" "I need to register a marriage," Nathan said. "And I need to file a formal complaint against the Frontier Matrimonial Agency." Winters blinked. "I see, and the marriage would be to—" "Miss Sarah Everwood," Nathan said, placing a hand on Sarah's back. "We intend to marry immediately and register the union to satisfy the terms of my land claim under the Married Settlers Act." The clerk's gaze flicked between Nathan and Sarah, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Harlow, you are aware that the Married Settlers Act requires a legitimate, legally recognized marriage." "I am." "And you are aware that there are complications with interspecies unions in some territories." "If you are asking whether it is legal for a human to marry an orc, Mr. Winters, the answer is yes," Nathan said evenly. "The territorial treaty specifically guarantees equal rights under the law. Unless you are telling me this office intends to violate territorial law." Winters held up his hands. "No, sir, just making sure you understand what you are doing." He pulled out a ledger and a form. "You will need 2 witnesses." "I will stand witness," Caroline said quietly from behind them. Everyone turned to look at her in surprise. She met Nathan's gaze squarely. "You have been more fair to me than you had to be, Mr. Harlow, and Miss Everwood has shown me more courtesy than I showed her. I will witness your marriage if you will have me." Nathan felt Sarah's hand find his and squeeze gently. "Thank you, Miss Fletcher. We would be honored." They found a second witness in the form of the land office's assistant, a young man named Peters who looked nervous but willing. Winters produced the marriage certificate and a small book of civil ceremonies. "Do you, Nathan Harlow, take Sarah Everwood to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Nathan looked at Sarah, at her dark eyes and the small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, at the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite the strangeness of the situation. "I do," he said clearly. "Do you, Sarah Everwood, take Nathan Harlow to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Sarah said, her voice strong and sure. "Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Winters made a notation in the ledger. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Harlow." Nathan cupped Sarah's face gently in his hands and kissed her, a soft press of lips that carried the weight of promises and hope. She kissed him back, her hands coming to rest on his chest, and for a moment the dingy land office disappeared and there was only the two of them, newly wed and wholly committed. When they parted, Caroline was smiling despite the tears on her cheeks, and even Winters looked faintly moved. "Congratulations," the clerk said. "Now, about this complaint against the Frontier Matrimonial Agency." They spent the next 2 hours detailing the fraud. Nathan presented his contract, dated and signed. Sarah presented hers, earlier and equally official-looking. Caroline added her own, the latest of the three. Winters examined all the documents carefully, making notes. "This is damning," he said finally. "They took money from all three of you, promised the same man to 2 different women, and clearly never intended to honor any of the agreements legitimately. I will forward this to the territorial marshal. There is also a prosecutor in the circuit court who handles fraud cases. Between your testimonies and these documents, I expect they will move quickly." "How quickly?" Nathan asked. "Marshall could be here within a week to take formal statements. Arrest warrants shortly after." Winters tapped his pen on the desk. "The agency is based in Millbrook, yes. They maintain an office on Front Street." "They did as of 3 weeks ago," Caroline confirmed. "That is where I booked passage on the coach to Mr. Harlow's Valley. Then they may still be here, bilking other poor souls." Winters stood. "I will send Peters to fetch the sheriff. We may be able to shut them down tonight." Events moved quickly after that. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Cobb, listened to their story with increasing anger. By the time they had finished, he was already calling for his deputies. "I have suspected that outfit for months," Cobb said. "But I never had evidence. People would complain, but they never had documentation like this. 3 separate contracts, all promising the same match." He shook his head. "That is fraud, plain and simple." He organized a raid on the agency office. Nathan, Sarah, and Caroline followed at a distance, watching as Cobb and his men surrounded the building. There was a brief commotion, some shouting, and then the deputies emerged with 2 men in custody. A slick-looking fellow in a fine suit and an older man who looked like a clerk. "That is Mr. Dashwood," Caroline said, pointing to the man in the suit. "He is the one who took my money." Cobb marched the prisoners directly to the town jail. Inside the agency office, they found stacks of contracts, ledgers full of names and fees, and multiple files showing the same pattern. Match one man with 2 or sometimes 3 women, collect fees from all parties, and hope distance and poor communication would prevent anyone from comparing notes. "They have been doing this for at least 2 years, Winters said, paging through the ledgers. "Dozens of victims, maybe hundreds. They would match frontier men who were isolated with women desperate enough to travel far for a fresh start. By the time anyone realized the fraud, the agency had their money and the victims were too far apart to coordinate." "What happens now?" Sarah asked quietly. "Now we prosecute," Cobb said grimly, "and we try to make restitution to the victims. It will not be perfect. Some of that money is already spent, but we will recover what we can." They spent another 2 hours giving formal statements. By the time they emerged from the sheriff's office, full dark had fallen and Nathan was exhausted. He found rooms for them at the town's only respectable boarding house, one for Caroline, one for himself and Sarah. Their room was small but clean, with a double bed and a washstand. Sarah moved around the space quietly, unpinning her hair, her movements slow with fatigue. "Are you all right?" Nathan asked. She turned to him with a tired smile. "I am married. To you, I am more than all right, husband." The word sent warmth through his chest. "Wife," he said, testing it out. Her smile widened. "I like the sound of that." He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Today was complicated." "Today was perfect," she corrected. "Complicated, yes, but perfect. We are married, Nathan. Legally properly married. The land claim is safe, the agency will face justice, and I am yours. And I am yours, he murmured into her hair. They held each other in the quiet room, the noise of the town muffled beyond the walls. Eventually, they prepared for bed, moving around each other with the careful awareness of newlyweds still learning each other's rhythms. That night, they consummated their marriage gently, carefully, with a tenderness that spoke of new love and hard-won trust. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Nathan felt a peace he had not known in years. "I was alone for so long," he said quietly into the darkness. "I did not realize how much I needed someone until you stepped down from that wagon." Sarah's hand found his, their fingers interlacing. "I was terrified that day, so sure you would send me away." "I almost did," he admitted. "Not because of what you are, but because I was afraid. Of change, of risk, of letting someone matter. And now I cannot imagine a life without you in it." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Harlow." She turned in his arms, her eyes shining in the faint light from the window. "Say it again." "Sarah Harlow," he repeated, understanding. "My wife." "Your wife," she agreed and kissed him again. The next morning they met Caroline for breakfast at the boarding house. She looked tired but more settled, some of the frantic desperation gone from her eyes. "The sheriff sent word," she said as they sat down. "The agency's assets are being seized. We should each recover most of our fees within a few months, once the court sorts through everything." "That is good news," Nathan said. Caroline nodded. "I have also been thinking about what you said, about finding legitimate work." She took a breath. "The boarding house proprietress mentioned she is looking for help. The woman who was managing the kitchen just left to get married, ironically. It would be room and board plus a small wage." "That sounds like a good opportunity," Sarah said. "It does." Caroline looked at them both. "I want to apologize. For yesterday, for the things I said, I was angry and afraid and I took it out on you both. That was wrong." "Apology accepted," Nathan said. "We have all been victims of the same fraud, Miss Fletcher. There is no point in fighting each other." "Caroline," she said. "Please call me Caroline. Miss Fletcher sounds so formal and we have been through too much together for formality." Sarah smiled. "Caroline, then. I am glad you are staying in Millbrook. It seems like a good town." "Better than what I left behind," Caroline agreed. "And who knows? Perhaps the next mail-order bride who arrives will actually get the husband she paid for." They laughed together, the tension of the previous days finally breaking. After breakfast, they walked to the land office to finalize the documentation for Nathan's claim. Winters greeted them with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Harlow. I have good news. Your marriage has been properly registered, and I have updated your land claim to reflect your married status. As far as the territory is concerned, your 160 acres are secure." Relief washed over Nathan. "Thank you, Mr. Winters." "Thank you for bringing the agency fraud to light," Winters replied. "We have already had 6 more people come forward with similar complaints. You may have saved dozens of people from being swindled." They left the land office with all their papers in order, legally married and legally settled. Caroline walked with them to the edge of town where Nathan's wagon waited. "I suppose this is goodbye," she said. "For now," Sarah said. "But Millbrook is not so far from our valley. You are welcome to visit, Caroline, once you are settled." Caroline looked surprised, then genuinely pleased. "I would like that. Thank you." They embraced briefly, a gesture of unexpected friendship born from shared adversity, and then Nathan helped Sarah up onto the wagon bench. As they rolled out of town, Sarah leaned against his shoulder, and he felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. The journey back to the homestead took most of the day. They talked idly about plans for the spring planting, about expanding the barn, about all the small details of building a life together. As the sun began to set, they crested the final ridge and the valley spread out below them, golden in the autumn light. "There it is," Nathan said. "Home." "Home," Sarah echoed, and the word carried a weight of belonging that made his throat tight. They spent the rest of the autumn and early winter settling into married life. The transition was easier than Nathan had expected, perhaps because they had already been living as partners for weeks before the wedding. But there was a new dimension to it now, a claiming and being claimed that deepened everything. Sarah moved into his bedroom, her few possessions blending with his. She hung curtains she had sewn herself, bright fabric that caught the morning light. She filled the cabin with small touches that made it feel less like a bachelor's shelter and more like a home. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, cushions for the rocking chair, the smell of bread baking almost daily. Nathan found himself watching her at odd moments, still half amazed that she was real, that she had chosen him. He would catch her singing while she worked, or find her reading by the fire with her hair loose around her shoulders, and feel a surge of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. They made love often, learning each other's bodies with the patience of people who had all the time in the world. Sarah was both shy and bold by turns, sometimes hesitant, sometimes taking what she wanted with a directness that left him breathless. He learned that she was ticklish along her ribs, that she made a particular soft sound when he kissed the point of her ear, that she liked to be held close afterward, her head on his chest, his heartbeat under her ear. Winter came in earnest in late November, snow piling high around the cabin. They were well prepared, with food stores laid in and firewood stacked to the rafters of the barn. The work of the homestead slowed to maintenance and small indoor projects. Nathan spent long hours at his workbench, crafting furniture and tools. Sarah sewed, read, and experimented with new recipes. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories and dreams. Sarah told him about her childhood, about the loneliness of being different, about the small kindnesses that had sustained her. Nathan told her about the war, about the things he had done and seen, about the guilt and the nightmares that still sometimes woke him in the dark. "You are a good man," she told him one night after he had confessed to a particularly brutal skirmish. "War makes monsters of everyone, but you chose to stop. You chose to build instead of destroy. That matters, Nathan." "Sometimes I dream that I am back there," he admitted. "Sometimes I wake up not knowing where I am. Then I will be here to remind you," she said simply. "You are home. You are safe. You are loved." The word hung in the air between them, spoken aloud for the first time. "I love you too," Nathan said, his voice rough. "I have for a while now, I just did not know how to say it." She smiled, that beautiful, radiant smile that transformed her whole face. "Then we are both blessed, husband, to find love in such an unexpected place." Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly together. Nathan carved her a jewelry box from pine, the lid inlaid with a pattern of leaves. Sarah knitted him a thick scarf in deep blue wool, soft and warm. They exchanged gifts by the fire and made love under a pile of quilts while snow fell softly outside. In January, a letter arrived via the mail rider who passed through monthly. It was from the territorial prosecutor, informing them that the Frontier Matrimonial Agency had been formally dissolved, its proprietors sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud. Restitution would be paid to all victims within the coming months. "Justice," Sarah said, reading over his shoulder. "Justice," Nathan agreed, "and more importantly, prevention. They will not be able to hurt anyone else." A second letter was from Caroline. She wrote that she had taken the position at the boarding house and was settling in well. She had made friends, was learning the town, and felt hopeful for the first time in years. She thanked them again for their kindness and said she hoped to visit in the spring. "I am glad," Sarah said. "She deserved better than what the agency did to her." "We all did," Nathan said. "But we found our way through it." February brought deep cold and heavier snows. They were snowed in for nearly 2 weeks, the drifts piling so high that Nathan had to dig a tunnel from the cabin to the barn just to tend the animals. But even the isolation felt cozy rather than oppressive, the two of them sealed in their own small world. Sarah started feeling unwell in late February, a persistent nausea that she initially attributed to something she ate. But when it continued for a week, then too, understanding dawned. "I think I might be with child," she said one morning, her hand pressed to her stomach. Nathan felt the world tilt. "Truly, I am not certain yet," she cautioned, "but the signs are there." He crossed to her and knelt in front of where she sat, placing his hands gently over hers on her belly. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," she admitted, "and joyful, and 100 other things all at once." "We will figure it out together," he promised, "just like everything else." By March, there was no doubt. Sarah was definitely pregnant, her body changing in small but unmistakable ways. They prepared quietly, talking about expanding the cabin to add a nursery, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. "Do you think our child will face prejudice?" Sarah asked one evening. Being half orc, Nathan was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Probably," he said honestly. "The world is not kind to those who are different, but our child will also have parents who love them, who will teach them to be strong and proud of who they are. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Sarah said and kissed him. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts. By April, the ground was soft enough to work, and Nathan began preparing the fields for planting. Sarah helped when she could, though he tried to insist she rest more. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him repeatedly. "I can still work." "I know you can," he said, "but I worry." "Then worry while I help you plant," she said firmly. And that was that. True to her word, Caroline visited in May, riding out with a merchant who was delivering supplies to the homesteads in the valley. She stayed for 3 days, helping with the planting and admiring the improvements they had made to the cabin. "You both look happy," she said on her last evening, the three of them sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "We are," Sarah said simply, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. Caroline smiled. "I am glad. After everything, you deserve happiness." "So do you," Nathan said. "How are things in Millbrook?" "Good," Caroline said. "Actually, very good. There is a man, a shopkeeper. He has been courting me very properly, I think. I think it might be something real." "That is wonderful," Sarah said warmly. "You must tell us all about him." They talked late into the night, friends forged in unexpected circumstances. When Caroline left the next morning, it was with promises to return and to send word when she had news of her own. Summer arrived in full, the valley green and lush. Nathan worked the fields while Sarah tended the garden and the household, her pregnancy progressing well despite the heat. They hired a young man from a neighboring homestead to help with the harvest, knowing that Sarah would be in no condition for heavy labor by the time autumn came. In late August, Sarah went into labor. Nathan rode hard to fetch the midwife from the nearest settlement, a capable woman named Mrs. Henshaw, who had delivered half the babies in the valley. She arrived to find Sarah pacing the cabin, breathing through contractions, her face set with determination. "First baby always takes the longest," Mrs. Henshaw said comfortingly, "but she is strong. She will do fine." Nathan was banished to the porch for most of it, which nearly drove him mad. He paced and fretted, listening to Sarah's occasional cries from inside, feeling utterly helpless. The sun set, and still the labor continued. Night fell, deep and dark, and Nathan sat on the porch steps with his head in his hands, praying to any god who might listen. Finally, as the eastern sky began to pale with the first hint of dawn, he heard it. A thin, reedy cry that grew stronger and more indignant by the second. "Mrs." Henshaw opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a daughter, Mr. Harlow, a healthy, loud daughter, and your wife is asking for you." Nathan bolted inside. Sarah lay in their bed, propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion. But she was smiling, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in clean linen. "Nathan," she said softly, "come meet your daughter." He crossed to the bed on shaking legs and looked down at the baby. She was tiny, impossibly small, with a dusting of dark hair and skin that was a pale, soft green. As he watched, she opened her eyes and they were dark like Sarah's, curious and aware. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is ours," Sarah said, and there was such joy in her voice that Nathan felt his eyes burn with tears. "What should we name her?" he asked. Sarah looked down at the baby, then back up at him. "I was thinking, Bella, it means beautiful, and she is. She is so beautiful, Nathan." "Bella Harlow," Nathan said, testing it out. The baby made a small noise, almost like agreement. "I think she approves, Mrs." Henshaw stayed for 3 more days, helping Sarah recover and teaching them both how to care for an infant. By the time she left, they were managing reasonably well, though Nathan had discovered that he had never been so tired in his entire life. Bella was a good baby, as babies went. She nursed well, slept in reasonable stretches, and only cried when she had a genuine need. But she was also demanding in the way all infants are, requiring constant attention and care. Nathan found himself falling in love all over again, this time with his daughter. He would hold her in the evenings, rocking her by the fire while Sarah rested, marveling at her tiny fingers and the way she would grip his thumb with surprising strength. "She has your hands," Sarah said one night watching them. "And your eyes," Nathan replied. "And your determination, I think." Bella grew quickly, thriving in the love and care they poured into her. By the time autumn arrived again, she was smiling and cooing, reaching for things with increasing coordination. They had been married just over a year. Nathan realized one evening as he sat on the porch with Bella in his arms, watching Sarah move around the kitchen through the window. 1 year ago, he had been alone in this valley, convinced that solitude was his fate. Now he had a wife he loved, a daughter who was the light of his life, and a future that stretched out before him full of possibility. Sarah came out to join them, sitting beside him on the porch steps. She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his free arm around her, the 3 of them forming a complete unit. "You ever think about that day at the coach stop?" Sarah asked quietly. "When I stepped down and you looked like you had seen a ghost?" Nathan laughed softly. "I think about it often, how close I came to sending you away, how different my life would be if I had." "I think about it too," Sarah said, "how terrified I was, how sure I was that you would reject me. I am glad I did not. So am I." She kissed his cheek. "So am I, husband." Bella made a happy sound, waving her tiny fists in the air, and they both laughed. Inside, the cabin glowed with warm light, waiting for them. The fields were harvested, the barn was full, and the winter stores were laid in. They were ready for whatever came next. Together, as partners, as they had always been meant to be, the years that followed were full of the hard work and small joys that made up a life on the frontier. Nathan expanded the cabin twice, first to add a proper nursery, then to create a second bedroom when Sarah became pregnant again in the spring following Bella's birth. Their second daughter arrived in early winter, a December baby with her mother's green skin and her father's lighter hair. They named her Rose, for the wild roses that grew along the creek and for the hope she represented, a second blessing in a life already rich with them. The homestead prospered. Nathan's fields produced good yields and he invested in more livestock, pigs, sheep, and additional cattle. Sarah's garden became legendary among the scattered neighbors, producing vegetables of exceptional size and quality. They traded surplus for goods they could not produce themselves, building relationships with other homesteaders and slowly becoming part of the valley's small but growing community. Not everyone accepted them easily. There were those who muttered about Nathan's choice of wife, about the half-orc children running around his property. But there were also those who judged them by their character and their work, who came to appreciate Sarah's kindness and Nathan's steady reliability. Caroline married her shopkeeper in the spring of their second year, and Nathan and Sarah traveled to Millbrook for the wedding, leaving the girls with Mrs. Henshaw for 2 days. It was the first time they had been apart from their children, and Sarah fretted the entire way to town. "They will be fine," Nathan assured her. "Mrs. Henshaw has raised 6 children of her own. Bella and Rose are in excellent hands." The wedding was a simple affair but joyful. Caroline glowed with happiness, and her husband, a quiet man named Thomas, looked at her with clear adoration. At the reception, Caroline pulled Nathan and Sarah aside. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for everything. If you had not fought for your marriage, if you had not exposed the agency, I would never have found my way here. I would never have met Thomas." "We are glad it worked out for you," Sarah said warmly. "You deserve every happiness." "So do you," Caroline said. "Both of you. I look at your family, at what you have built together, and I see what love should be. Thank you for showing me that." They returned to the homestead to find the girls healthy and happy, and Sarah stopped fretting quite so much about leaving them with trusted friends. Life fell into comfortable rhythms. The girls grew, Bella quick and curious, Rose more contemplative but equally determined. They helped with age-appropriate chores, learning to feed chickens and gather eggs, to pull weeds in the garden and help with the harvest. When Bella was 4 and Rose was 2, Sarah became pregnant again. This time the baby was a boy, born in late summer with strong lungs and an even stronger appetite. They named him Zachary, and Nathan felt a particular pride in having a son, though he loved all his children equally. The cabin became louder, more chaotic, full of laughter and occasional tears. Nathan built furniture to accommodate the growing family. A larger table, additional beds, shelves for the increasing number of books Sarah insisted on acquiring for the children's education. "They will know how to read and write," she said firmly. "They will know numbers and history. They will have every advantage we can give them." Nathan did not argue. He had seen too many frontier children grow up illiterate and limited. He wanted better for his own. Sarah taught the children herself, setting aside time each day for lessons. Bella took to reading with enthusiasm, devouring every book they could get her. Rose preferred numbers, showing an early aptitude for calculation that surprised them both. Zachary was still too young for formal lessons, but he sat in on them anyway, absorbing more than they initially realized. The homestead continued to grow. Nathan filed for additional acreage as the family expanded, using his status as an established married settler with children to claim more land. By their 5th anniversary, they had over 300 acres, with 200 under cultivation and the rest in pasture and woodland. They hired help during the busy seasons now, young men from the settlement looking for work and experience. Nathan taught them what he knew, paying fair wages and treating them with respect. Several of them went on to file claims of their own, staying in the valley and building their own homesteads. The community grew around them. A small church was established, meeting in a barn until they could raise funds for a proper building. A school opened, and Sarah eagerly enrolled Bella and Rose, though she continued supplementing their education at home. There were challenges. A hard winter when Zachary was too nearly broke them, with snow so deep and temperatures so cold that they lost half their livestock despite every effort to protect them. They rebuilt slowly, taking on debt they had avoided until then, working extra hard to recover. There were also moments of grace. The year Bella turned 7, a traveling theater troupe came through the valley, and they all attended the performance, the children wide-eyed with wonder at the costumes and drama. The year Rose turned 6, Nathan finished building her a dollhouse, an intricate creation with real glass windows and tiny furniture. The year Zachary turned 4, they took a rare family trip to Millbrook to visit Caroline and Thomas, who now had 2 children of their own. Through it all, Nathan and Sarah grew together rather than apart. They had their disagreements, moments of frustration and fatigue, but they had learned to talk through problems rather than letting them fester. They made time for each other even as the demands of children and farm threatened to consume them entirely. "I love our life," Sarah told him one evening as they sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed. "I love our chaos and our noise and every exhausting moment of it." "So do I," Nathan said, pulling her close. "Though I will admit I sometimes miss the quiet days when it was just us." "We will have quiet days again," Sarah said, "when the children are grown and gone, and then we will miss this chaos desperately." She was right, of course. Nathan could already feel time accelerating, the years passing faster as the children grew. Bella was becoming a young woman, Rose was developing her own strong personality, and Zachary was turning from a toddler into a little boy with opinions and questions about everything. They added a 4th child when Zachary was 3, another boy they named Marcus. He was a sunny baby, easygoing and happy, a stark contrast to Zachary's intensity. The family felt complete with 4 children, and Sarah declared that her baby-bearing days were finished. "4 is enough," she said firmly. "More than enough." Nathan, who had been doing calculations about how large the cabin would need to be to accommodate more children, agreed with relief. The children grew and thrived. Bella showed an interest in healing, spending time with Mrs. Henshaw and learning about herbs and midwifery. Rose developed her mathematical talents, helping Nathan with the complex calculations required for crop rotation and yield projection. Zachary was fascinated by animals, spending hours in the barn and the pastures, gentle and patient with even the most skittish creatures. Marcus, still young, seemed to be following in his mother's footsteps, showing an early love of growing things. They were good children, Nathan thought with pride. Smart and kind, hardworking and curious. Yes, they faced prejudice from some quarters for their mixed heritage, but they also had friends and a community that knew them as individuals. They were learning to navigate a world that was not always kind, but they were doing so with strength and grace inherited from their mother. Sarah remained the heart of the family and the homestead. She managed the household with efficiency, taught the children with patience, and worked beside Nathan in the fields when needed. She had grown into her role as wife and mother without losing herself, maintaining her love of books and learning, her quiet strength, her fierce protectiveness of those she loved. Nathan sometimes caught himself watching her, still amazed that she was his. The orc woman who had stepped down from that wagon all those years ago, terrified and hopeful, had become the center of his entire world. "What are you thinking?" she asked one evening, catching him staring. "That I am the luckiest man alive," he said honestly. She smiled, that beautiful smile that still made his heart skip. "Flatterer. Truth-teller," he corrected and kissed her. As the children grew older and more independent, Nathan and Sarah found themselves able to take on larger projects. They built a proper barn to replace the aging original structure. They expanded the house again, this time adding a dedicated room for Sarah's books and the children's lessons. They invested in better equipment, a real plow instead of the makeshift one Nathan had been using, a newer wagon with better suspension. The homestead became one of the most prosperous in the valley, a testament to years of hard work and careful planning. Other settlers looked to Nathan for advice, and he found himself taking on informal leadership roles in the community, helping to settle disputes and organize collective efforts like road maintenance and well digging. Sarah became equally important to the community in her own way. She taught reading to children whose parents were illiterate. She shared her knowledge of herbs and healing freely. She organized the valley's first harvest festival, bringing together scattered families for a celebration of the season's bounty. Slowly, inevitably, they became pillars of the community. The suspicion and prejudice that had greeted Sarah initially faded in the face of years of kindness and contribution. When the church finally completed its building, the congregation voted to have Sarah serve on the board of trustees, a recognition of her standing that moved her to tears. "We have built something real here," Nathan told her that night. "Not just a homestead, but a place in the world. A community that accepts us." "It took time," Sarah said, "but yes, we have. And our children will inherit not just land, but belonging. That matters, Nathan." It mattered more than he could express. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and joys. Bella, at 16, announced her intention to apprentice with Mrs. Henshaw officially, to learn the midwife's trade properly. Nathan and Sarah supported her, proud of her determination and her calling. Rose, at 14, showed academic abilities that outstripped what the Valley School could offer. After much discussion and some anguish, they arranged for her to attend a girls' academy in a larger town, 3 days' ride away, boarding with a family Caroline had recommended. It was the first time one of their children had left home for an extended period, and Sarah cried for a week after Rose departed. "She will be fine," Nathan assured her. "She is strong and smart, just like her mother." "I know," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "But she is also my baby, and she is so far away." Rose thrived at the academy, her letters home full of excitement about her studies. She came home for holidays and summers, each time seeming a little more grown up, a little more sophisticated. But she remained grounded, helping with the harvest and playing with her younger brothers, the same Rose underneath the new polish. Zachary, at 12, was already taller than his mother and showed signs of eventually matching Nathan's height. He had a way with horses in particular, training them with patience and skill. Nathan began to think he might become a horse breeder, a profession that would serve him well on the frontier. Marcus, at 9, was still finding his way, but his love of growing things had only intensified. He spent hours in the garden with Sarah, learning not just how to grow vegetables but the science behind it, asking questions about soil composition and plant biology that sometimes stumped them both. "We are raising children who will change the world," Sarah said one evening, watching Marcus make careful notes about his experimental tomato plants. "We are raising children who will make it better," Nathan agreed. "That is all any parent can hope for." They were well into middle age now, Nathan approaching 45, Sarah a year younger. The hard work of homesteading had left its marks. Calloused hands, sun-weathered skin, the occasional ache in joints pushed too hard. But they were healthy and strong, still capable of putting in a full day's work. Their relationship had deepened over the years, the initial passion giving way to something steadier but no less powerful. They knew each other completely, could communicate with a glance, could anticipate each other's needs and moods. They still made love regularly, though with less frequency than in their early years, the intimacy now flavored with comfort and familiarity. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked one night as they lay in bed, the house quiet around them. "Marrying me, I mean, taking on everything that came with it." "Never," Nathan said immediately. "Not once, not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah. You and the children and the life we built together. I would not change a single moment. Not even the hard times, especially not the hard times," he said. "They made us stronger. They taught us what we were capable of, and they led us here to this moment, to this life. I regret nothing." She curled against him, her head on his chest. "I love you, Nathan Harlow, more now than when we married, which I would not have thought possible." "I love you too," he said, kissing the top of her head, "more than words can express." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the peace of a life well lived. The seasons turned. Bella completed her apprenticeship and began taking on clients of her own, attending births throughout the valley with growing confidence. Rose graduated from the academy with honors and announced her intention to become a teacher, to bring education to frontier communities that lack schools. Zachary took over the primary management of the livestock, proving as capable as Nathan had hoped. Marcus, at 13, was already planning crop rotations 3 years in advance, his experimental plots yielding impressive results. Nathan and Sarah found themselves becoming grandparents when Bella, at 22, married a young farmer from the next valley and gave birth to a daughter the following year. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Nathan felt the circle complete in a way he had not anticipated. "This is what it was all for," he said to Sarah, watching Bella nurse her baby. "To create this. Family, continuity, love passing from one generation to the next." "It is everything," Sarah agreed, her eyes bright with tears of joy. They had been married for over 20 years now, nearly a quarter-century of partnership and love. The homestead that had been a rough cabin and 40 acres when they started now sprawled across nearly 500 acres, with multiple buildings, cultivated fields, orchards, and pastures. It represented not just land but legacy, something they would pass on to their children and grandchildren. The community they had helped build had grown as well. The valley now had over 50 families, a proper church, a school, a general store, and even a small sawmill. There were regular social gatherings, barn raisings, harvest festivals, and 4th of July celebrations. The scattered homesteads had become a real community, bound together by mutual support and shared values. And at the center of it, respected and valued, were Nathan and Sarah Harlow, the couple who had overcome fraud and prejudice to build something real and lasting. As Nathan approached his 50th year, he began to slow down slightly, letting the children take on more of the heavy work. He focused on planning and management, on teaching Zachary and Marcus the skills they would need to run the place after he was gone. "Not that I am planning to go anywhere soon," he told Sarah, "but we need to be realistic. The boys should know how to manage everything." "You are not old, Nathan," Sarah said. "We both have many good years ahead of us." "I know," he agreed. "But I also know that I want to spend those years enjoying what we have built, not killing myself with work. Let the young ones do the heavy lifting. We have earned some rest." They did slow down, gradually stepping back from the day-to-day labor of the homestead. Zachary and Marcus, now in their 20s, took over primary responsibility for the fields and livestock. Bella's husband joined the family operation, bringing additional skills and labor. Even Rose, when she was home from her teaching position in a frontier town 2 territories over, contributed her organizational abilities and her way with numbers. Nathan and Sarah became the elder generation, the repositories of wisdom and experience, the steady center around which the family revolved. They spent more time with their grandchildren, now numbering 3 with another on the way. They took long walks around the property, reminiscing about the early years, pointing out the places where things had happened. "This is where I proposed to you," Nathan said one autumn afternoon, standing in what was now a cultivated field but had once been wild grass. "Right here the evening after we exposed the agency. You were so earnest," Sarah said, smiling at the memory, "so determined to make things right." "I was so in love," Nathan corrected. "I just had not fully admitted it to myself yet. And now—" "Now I am more in love than ever," he said, pulling her close, "and grateful every day for the life you gave me." They stood there in the field they had planted together, surrounded by the evidence of decades of shared work, and Nathan felt a profound sense of completion. This was what he had been searching for when he came to the frontier all those years ago. Not just land, not just peace, but purpose and connection and love. The orc woman who had stepped down from that wagon, terrified and hopeful, had become his entire world. She had given him children and grandchildren, partnership and passion, a life richer than any he had imagined possible. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" Sarah asked. "For stepping down from that wagon," Nathan said. "For being brave enough to stay when I was too stunned to know what I wanted. For loving me even when I did not deserve it. For building this life with me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you for seeing past my green skin to the person underneath. For choosing me when you could have sent me away. For loving me and our children and the life we built. For being my partner in everything." They kissed there in the field, 2 people who had found each other through fraud and circumstance and had chosen, every day since, to continue finding each other. 2 people who had built not just a homestead but a home, not just a family but a legacy. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. In the distance, they could hear the children calling the livestock in for the evening, could see smoke rising from the cabin's chimney where dinner was being prepared. Home, family, love. It had all started with a wagon and a mismatched mail-order bride, with terror and hope and a leap of faith. And it had become everything. Nathan took Sarah's hand, and together they walked back to the house, their footsteps following paths worn smooth by years of walking this land together. Behind them, the fields stretched out in orderly rows, ready for the spring planting. Ahead, the cabin glowed with warm light, full of the people they loved most in the world. They had built something beautiful from the wreckage of a swindle. They had created love from uncertainty, family from loneliness, community from isolation. And they had done it together, as partners, just as they had promised that first confused, hopeful evening. As they reached the porch, Bella emerged with her daughter on her hip, Rose right behind her with a book in her hands, the boys calling greetings from the barn. Sarah squeezed Nathan's hand and he squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they had ever needed to say to each other. "I choose you. I love you. I am home." They stepped inside together, into the warmth and noise and beautiful chaos of the life they had built, and closed the door behind them on another perfect day.